Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Plutus Awards podcast. I'm your host, Chris Browning, and I am thrilled to be joining you all again. Our community is filled with hundreds of stories from creators and entrepreneurs just like you. And through this podcast, we plan to share these stories. From bloggers to podcasters, writers, speakers, and more. Let's jump in and meet today's guest.
Hi everyone, my name is Eric Rosenberg. I'm the founder of Personal Profitability, a blog, podcast, and YouTube channel all about helping you make the most of your money. I started online all the way back in October 2008, and I do it because I love helping people get profitable.
So Eric, I think we can officially call you like an OG in this whole digital media space. You've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah, once I hit 10 years, I think that's when I became an official dinosaur in blogger years.
You're like in the founding fathers class when it comes to the amount of time you've been building things online. I mean, that's a long time.
Yeah, I've actually been to every single FinCon. My blog, I started it back in 2008, right after I quit a job working as a bank manager. And in the time, I've seen the industry change. Back then, there were probably only maybe a couple dozen personal finance blogs on the entire internet. Now there's probably 100,000. Who knows how many there are today. So it was easier to be a bigger fish in a small pond back then. But over the years, it's been great to see this community develop and grow and turn into something so amazing. And also, if it weren't for this community, not only would I not have my job, I don't know if it would exist if it weren't for the online content creating community. But if it hadn't been for going to FinCon and being involved in the KZ and other online communities around personal finance, I definitely wouldn't be doing this full time today.
I mean, one of the things that's always fascinated me, because it's not too often that I can talk to someone who's spent so much time creating on the internet. How have things changed for you from when you first started to now?
Well, a lot of it is just how I've learned to better position and brand myself online. If you want to go way back to when I started writing about money, my blog was at narrowbridgeadventures.blogspot.com. I know a little bit more about how to pick a URL these days. There was no such thing as a podcast, I don't think, or there might have been a few electronic dance music ones. Actually, the first podcast I listened to wasn't anything spoken word like this. It came from Tiesto, the DJ. I'm a big EDM fan. So that's how I originally got into podcasts. It wasn't until later that people started talking on podcasts and about like things like sports and money and other topics. So the whole internet's changed. Back then in 2008, I didn't have a smartphone yet. If I wanted to read something online, we all Googled everything. It wasn't that long ago, but there was no mobile video. That's something that has come about in the last 10 years. If you think about how your relationship with your phone has changed, in 2008, I'm trying to think if I even had a smartphone yet. I had a cell phone. I could send text messages. But back then, there was no 2G. I think we were on 2G. Now we're on 4G. So the speed of our phones has changed. Facebook was around, but I think you still needed a .edu email address to join Facebook back in those days. I don't know if Twitter was out yet. It came out around that time. So the whole internet has changed. The way people interact with their phones with online content has changed. I mean, back then, a lot of people would pick an email address or an AOL username or however they got online. They would pick something that was very, not personal. They didn't want anyone to really know who they were on the internet. It was still very anonymous. These days, you sign up as yourself, you have a Facebook profile with your name on it, and most bloggers put their names on it. So the whole thing has changed since 2008. But the one thing that has stayed consistent is the readers or the listeners or the viewers are all interested in learning more about improving their money. And that's something that I think is timeless for all of us.
Yeah, true. I mean, there's always going to be that need, which is, it's cool. It's sad that we all don't get this taught to us in school, but it's cool that there's people out there who are making this their mission to help people be better at handling their finances. And so for you, Eric, you started at a time, like you said, where, people were still figuring things out. It was not as pervasive as it is now. What made you feel confident enough to step out and make this your full-time work?
Oh, well, to go way back when I started the blog, I had actually started another blog first about Israel and the Middle East. It was just something I was passionate about. I'm still passionate about from my college days. And I got a little notoriety there, but what it really did was teach me about how blogs worked. I learned about things like AdSense. I knew a little HTML from high school. I was self-taught, but I started to learn about blog themes and a little more about SEO and online advertising. So when I jumped in and started my personal finance blog, it wasn't like I went in with zero knowledge or experience. I'd probably had a year or two of blogging experience on another Blogspot blog. But what really kicked off what became personal profitability was I was reading these personal finance blogs, mostly by people who were in a ton of credit card debt. And I just finished college less than a year before. I got a finance degree. I graduated from college debt-free. I've still to this day never paid a penny of credit card interest. I always try to manage my finances well. And I was reading these blogs and I was learning a lot. They were really personal. They were sharing their journeys. But I started thinking after I left the bank, well, geez, I've never been in debt. I have a finance degree. And a month ago, I was approving mortgage loans. I should be the one writing about money. So that's really what motivated it. That's how I got started. And, fast forward, it was 8 years of hard work and I became an overnight success and was able to quit my job.
Well, what was it that gave you, I guess, the education, the know-how into taking your skills of, we were working in a bank and then translating that to the internet?
Yeah, well, so as I mentioned, I'd been blogging a little bit before. So part of it was just, applying what I had learned about writing online and just putting a different topic on it. A lot of it, though, was looking out and seeing what people's questions were, looking where people were struggling. And back then, I was in my early 20s, so where was I struggling? What did I want to learn about money? Because even with a finance degree, I learned a heck of a lot about portfolio management and how to run a bank, but they don't still teach you a lot about personal finance, even in business school. So I was trying to figure out, how do I deal with getting a new car? Right after I started my first job, I was about 2 weeks in, and my old hand-me-down Volvo station wagon died. It would have cost more to fix the car. It wasn't worth it. It would have totaled it pretty much. The water pump went out, and the car wasn't worth it. So I had to figure out, well, I need a new car. I need to get to work. So that meant getting a car loan. So that was something I wrote about because I had never gotten a car loan before. Later on, when I went and got the MBA, that's when I did get student loans. So there was another place I was learning about how to Stafford loans work at the time, how to student loans work. As I paid off my loans, I paid off my car in half the time. I paid off my student loans in 2 years and 6 days after graduation. And I always hate those 6 days. 2 years and 6 days after graduation. And I just shared the story of how I did it, how I was automating my money, how I was trying to funnel my paycheck into my debt while still being able to go out and enjoy myself with my friends. Those were all things that I was trying to figure out. I tried to be as open as I could in sharing that with my readers.
I mean, sharing your life on the internet is a very personal thing to do.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, you're opening yourself up to, you're being very vulnerable. I mean, how did you feel doing that? Did you feel like this was something that you set out to do, to be very open and share your personal life like this? Or is something that kind of just occurred naturally as you were working through the process and putting out content?
It started, I had a level of intention about how much I wanted to share and how much I didn't. In the old days of the blog, if you go back to the old posts, which I don't know if you want to do, they weren't as good back then as they are now. And if you do go back to some of those old ones, I always referred to myself as Eric, but I wouldn't tell anyone my last name. So people knew I was a guy in my 20s named Eric in Denver, but I didn't want to be tied specifically to any employers. I didn't want to get in trouble at work, and I didn't want to get them in trouble. I was working at a big phone company. I'd say I'm working at a big phone company. I'd never say the employer I work at. But, eventually down the road, you kind of figure out, when I wrote about how my company was bought and that changed where I was working and things like stock option plans, people might have been able to figure out and connect the dots if they really wanted to figure out who I was. But over time, I realized I was looking at these other blogs and I thought, people really trust you if you're willing to say who you are. And if you're hiding behind even just your first name, it's a little harder to say, oh, well, I trust this person. They don't even tell me their last name. So eventually I had a coming out online and I said, my last name is Rosenberg. I don't know what I expected to happen at that time. There were no earthquakes or tornadoes or rays of light from the sky. It was just another day in the blog, and most people probably didn't even think twice about it. But that was a big step. I didn't realize it, just thinking about it now, into building my reputation for freelance writing, which is what eventually led to me leaving my job and going full time.
There is something incredibly powerful as someone who's on the consumption side, as like the reader of this content, to be able to put like a real person to the person putting out all this media, because the internet is full of a lot of people who would like to remain anonymous. And I think there's something very impersonal about that. There's something that kind of disconnects you from just a random username versus this is a real person. Here's a picture. Here's their name. I know who they are. It's a different level of intimacy with the creator of the content that you're reading and enjoying.
Yeah, definitely. Everyone has their own comfort level with what they're willing to do online, and it's definitely not a requirement to give your real name to be a successful person online. Like you and I both know J Money from Budgets Are Sexy. We know that his name in real life probably wasn't J Money when his parents, I don't think, were the Money family, but everybody knows him as Jay, and he's been able to build that brand and reputation, and he does put his real face out there, so we know who he is, and we have been able to build a genuine relationship with him. But then there are people who are just very anonymous and very private, and I think that can hinder their building an audience and building trust online.
I agree. It's just something special about it, and it's very interesting in that you were kind of like on. I think a lot of people were still anonymous when you were doing it, right? I think I don't think there's too many people who took the leap that you did to go ahead and say, you know what, this is who I am. Come talk to me.
And I think I did it at a time that other people were doing it as well, so I kind of went with the community direction of being more open and more transparent. But definitely in the beginning, there were, I think, more people than not were being more private about their IRL, their in real life identities than their online identities. And yeah, just over time, as the internet's become more part of our life, I think people are just more comfortable. I mean, think about just to compare online dating. I mean, back in 2008, online dating existed, but it looked a lot different than it does today. I mean, back then I'm Jewish, so my JDate profile had, you could see my name was Eric, but people were still even kind of nervous to go online and meet other people off the internet because they thought, you don't really know who's on the other side. You don't really know who you're going to be meeting. Is it safe? Is it normal? Is it okay? Our moms back then probably wouldn't have wanted us to go on online dates. But these days, how many people do you know that have met their significant other on Bumble or any of those apps where you can swipe right and left to date? So the whole way we interact with the internet has changed, and that has made it better for online content creators, or easier for them to come out and say, here's who I am and here's what I'm doing and how I'm trying to help you.
Yeah, exactly. You couldn't even imagine being as personal and open and connected as we are now on the internet, 10 years ago. It would have seemed crazy. You just don't do that.
And then the only people who were really being open about who they were people on TV and in newspapers and in magazines, which were the major media sources at the time. As the internet has become the major media source and has gotten a better reputation. There's still shady things happening on the internet all the time, but there's also things that are very on the up and up on the internet, and it feels safer to be a part of that open community online.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of speaking about community and what you've built to be, your living, what you do to support yourself and your family. I'm from California. I'm still in California. You're out here as well.
Yeah, California love.
Right, exactly. The best coast, as I like to call it. But
left coast, best coast. Yeah. Sorry, guys, out in New York. I know we have some people in the Plutus community who are on the East Coast, and they just live somewhere that's not quite as good as where we live. Sorry.
Exactly. When you don't have to deal with snow, can you even argue with that? I don't know what you can say.
And if you really want snow, I live in Ventura, so without leaving my county, if I really wanted to, I could go surfing in the morning, take a drive for a couple hours up to Big Bear, and be snowboarding in the afternoon. So I got the best of both.
Well, to balance this out, since we're probably getting a lot of hate right now from everyone else, like these horrible California people, we do have something that's a bit of a challenge right now. And I know it's something that you're concerned about and you're facing, and that is AB5, which could be potentially serious for people who do what you do.
Yes, actually, the week that we're recording this, earlier in the week, I got an email from my biggest client that I hit 35 articles and they want to put me on hold until AB5 is resolved. For those of you who don't know what AB5 is, a little crash course in this ridiculous law that California's passed. There's a new-ish law went into effect at the beginning of January 2020, and it says more or less who should be an employee versus an independent contractor. And that came out of Uber and Lyft. Uber drivers, there's a lot of controversy if they really control their schedule and if they really should be considered business owners or employees of Uber. And that goes out to a lot of other industries as well. But these people who in the California government who weren't thinking so far ahead made a law just to really codify who should and shouldn't be with that employee status. And they said any content creator who creates 35 or more content pieces per year has to be considered an employee. Now, there's arguably that shouldn't apply to me anyway, because I actually have an S Corp. So the way I organize my business, my clients aren't hiring Eric Rosenberg. They're hiring my company, Narrow Bridge Media, and I am an employee of Narrow Bridge Media. So technically, the law shouldn't apply to me anyway. But lawyers don't want to get sued or fined or get their companies in trouble. So the company that I'm working with wanted to take the most conservative approach and said, hey, Eric, you hit 35 articles in the middle of March, and until that law goes away, we're not going to take anything more from you. So that definitely affects my top and bottom line. That affects my ability to pay my mortgage and very expensive health insurance and all the other good things that we have, whether we're in California or not.
Wow, that's a really heavy hand that they took. Seems to have a very broad impact. What is the outlook right now? What are you seeing as the potential outcome of this, down the road?
Yeah, so there's a new law. It's a bill. It's not a law yet. That is in the California legislature called AB 1850. And I emailed the head of the labor committee, my own House representative for my district, and I'm encouraging them to pass this law as quickly as possible. So what the law does is it actually fixes that 35 article problem for people just like me. So it affects video creators, photographers, and written content producers, and removes the 35 article limit given the company you're working with allows you to work with other companies, doesn't require you to work in their office, and gives you certain freedoms on how your schedule and rates work. So that 100% solves my problem. It's in the committee right now as we're recording this. So hopefully any day now it will be voted on and passed there, and then go on to the big House and Senate to get passed and signed by Governor Newsom. And then my problems are gone, and any other freelancers in California. So if you make money online in California, definitely send a note to your congresspeople and let them know how you feel about AB 5. And if you're like me, you're probably very against it.
Understandably. Hopefully this continues to get moved forward and we can see a resolution in the near future.
Yeah, there's a very good chance it could be resolved within the month, but it's government, so you never know. They're dealing with coronaviruses, and who knows what else is going to come down the pipe. So freelancers making money might not be their top priority. But if you are a freelancer and your client just emailed you and said you're going to make less money, it's definitely your priority.
Oh, for sure. Hopefully by the time everyone listens to this episode, this is more of a history lesson than an update on current events. So
I want to knock on all the wood around my office.
Eric, I did want to ask you about, because we've talked about, the growth that you've had and how you've developed and kind of got yourself to where you are now. But I think for a lot of people listening, they're like, well, that's not my story. I've tried and I've had some failures and I've had things that it didn't go as expected. And I think it's important to share the fact that even though someone looks successful, doesn't mean that they haven't had struggles along the way and they haven't had things that did not go as they planned. And I think it's always really cool to hear those stories. So you have some experience in this area with trying out a few things that didn't quite go as you thought they would.
Yeah, that's very true. There have been a handful of things that I've worked on that kind of flopped, and some things I worked on that had mediocre success. Maybe they made a little money, but not as much as I expected. And I dropped those projects because at the end of the day, we all have limited time. We have limited resources. And if you're anything like me, I have 3 kids. So I have very little time outside of my workday to work. I mean, back when I was in my 20s, I'd come home from work and I'd boot up my laptop and I'd start to work. These days, when I finish work, I have to chase my kids around the house. So it's important to think long-term about how your schedule comes together. But yeah, I'm happy to share a couple of failures I've had along the way. One that's kind of fun to think back to way back in college, I had the idea. Actually, the idea started in middle school. So this is an old idea. You remember those bracelets people wore that to WWJD?
Oh, yeah. I remember those.
So I was like, well, these are like the trendiest thing. Everybody I know has one, but I'm Jewish. I'm never going to wear one. So, but not as a way to be offensive to the people that wore them. But I thought this is an opportunity for a joke or something kind of interesting outside the box. So I came up with the idea NEYS because I was a snowboarder, never eat yellow snow. And I made a couple hundred bracelets. I actually found the companies that made the WWJD bracelets, and I paid them to make a few hundred NEYS bracelets. I still have about 100 of them. So that shows how well the business went. I actually tried to give them away to my readers one time on my email newsletter. No one even wanted one. It's like, I will give it to you for free. And no one wanted one. But that taught me a lot on timing in business. I didn't have the money to do the business till I was in college. After I had a job, when I was in middle school, I didn't have any money to start a business. So that taught me if you have an idea, it might not always be a good idea 5 years later still.
So this is an idea you held on to for a while, and you just needed the capital to actually get it off the ground.
Yeah, and the capital is only a few $100. But again, when you're in high school, a few $100 is a lot of money. So
oh yeah, might as well be $1 million.
Yeah, there was no way. Yeah, so I started that and ended that business. Another one that I tried that was a little farther down the road. I have a really good friend who I met actually at the very first FinCon. His name's Jeff Fruworth, and we had an idea to start a reusable bag store. Actually, looking back, we were at the right time in the right market. Right before everyone started hating on plastic bags, I didn't realize everyone was going to start hating plastic bags as much as they did, especially here in California where they're now illegal. So we had this idea, and we also wanted to do some of those like silicone reusable lunch bags that a kid could take their sandwich in and bring it back home and not have to throw it away. But ultimately what we figured out is it's really, really hard to build a profitable business when your competition is something that someone can buy at the grocery store checkout for 99 cents. So
yeah, I can see the problem with that.
Yeah. So things you don't think about when you start a business, sometimes you learn along the way. So those were two failure stories. The first one, I probably ended up out a couple $100 and not a big deal. The second one, I think we lost a few thousand combined between the two of us. So that's a little bit more of an ouch, but I look back at it as just a learning moment. I'm, fortunate to be in a place that I make enough money online that $1,000 or two isn't going to make me broke. So I'm able to experiment and try new things. And the places that I've reinvested in my main business have paid off really well. So every time something doesn't work, it's just an expensive way to learn about business.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's one of those things that it's so scary to try something new. But I think the process of trying something new, even if it isn't successful, you take so much away from that. You really do learn from your mistakes, and you learn things you would not have learned if you just played it safe and said, I'm only going to just focus on this one thing that I think is pretty sure to work out.
Oh, absolutely. And even when I quit my job and went full time, I still have stories of things that didn't work out nearly the way I thought. For example, when I left my job, I was writing as a big part of my income, but I was also doing WordPress development. Because I built all my own websites. I knew by this point HTML, CSS, and PHP. So for WordPress, I knew all the code I needed. And all my friends from the personal finance world were saying, hey, Eric, will you help me with the website? And I said yes for free many, many times before I started charging and turned that into a business. And after I quit my job, that was in April 2016. A few months later, it was getting to be the end of the summer, and I was looking at my laptop, sitting there. At that point, I was working in my kitchen because I lived in an apartment in expensive Southern California. I just moved here. And I was looking at my laptop, and with my accounting background, I have really detailed accounting records. And I use QuickBooks. I was looking at my books, and I was thinking, why am I spending more and more and more time, but my revenue isn't growing at the same rate? And that's when I noticed I had this aha moment. 76% of my revenue was coming from writing. And I figured that was taking about 20% of my time, and about 15% of my revenue was coming from website development. And that was taking about 80% of my time and giving me about 95% of my stress. And if you're familiar with the Pareto principle or the 80-20 rule, that pretty much just smacked me in the face right there and said, Eric, you need to be writing more and web developing less. So actually, even though I had a profitable, some people would say very successful website developing business, I just ended it that month. I had some recurring clients on retainer deals where I was doing maintenance and continuing upgrades on their website. And I said, at the end of next month, I'm going to be stopping this, so I'll help you find someone new if that's what you're looking for. And I just cut off that flow of money, which when you are newly self-employed, just turning off 15% of your income, that's a little nerve-wracking. It wasn't the easiest thing I'd ever done. But then over the next 3 months, my income roughly tripled to the first time I hit over $10,000 a month for the first time. Wow. So by having a few failures and then having some mediocre successes, I was able to learn enough about business to recognize that opportunity and that problem and embrace the 80-20 rule. And here I am with, I'm doing well. I used to do income reports at personalprofitability.com, so you can see all the way through the end of about a year ago is when I stopped doing those, but I still left them all online, so you can see 7 years of income reports. And those months where I made those big changes, you can see in the numbers, it's like a hockey stick growth moment. And that's what we all hope to find, whether we're creating a blog or a podcast or YouTube or TikTok, whatever you're into. It's those moments that we really have breakout growth that will define our future success. So hopefully when you're looking, whether it's your accounting records or your analytics or something in your business, you'll be able to identify what can give you those hockey stick moments.
Oh, that's good. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. It's sometimes those changes that seem extremely scary that can be the most impactful to the work that you're doing into your business. So no, I appreciate you giving that example. And I also appreciate your time, you coming on, sharing your story. And for me, it was just really cool to learn more about what you've done in your path to get to where you are now. So if people want to reach out to you, maybe talk to you, reach out, ask you some questions, what's the best place for them to do that?
Sure. The best place to find me is personalprofitability.com if you're into personal finance for hustlers and entrepreneurs. Or if you're curious about my freelance business, you can head to ericrosenberg.com and find everything there.
Perfect. I'll make sure that gets put into the show notes. That way, if you're driving, you don't worry about, you have to write that down right now. Just check the show notes.
Yeah, don't have an accident. Please be safe. Check my website when you get there. Or if you have a really, really long red light and this episode ends, you can search for the Personal Profitability Podcast.
Our lawyers say I cannot endorse that statement, but do what you will.
That was not advice. That was merely entertainment.
Hey, well, thank you so much, Eric. I really appreciate the time, and thanks for hopping on here and talking.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm a big fan of the Plutus community, and it was my pleasure to be here.
Hey, I appreciate all of you joining us here for another episode, and next week we'll be hopping back into our Plutus Foundation webinar series with special guest Sarah Lee Kane. So make sure you're subscribed so that way you get that episode and more from the Plutus Awards podcast. You can learn more about our guests and the Plutus Awards podcast at plutusawards.com/podcast and on Instagram at Plutus Awards. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and remember to keep creating.